Kia ora koutou katoa. I want to talk today about the parable called the parable of the rich fool, found in Luke 12 verses 13 to 21. It's a story about justice, about possessions, and about what both might have to do with God. The parable needs to be read in relation to the 3 verses preceding it, where Jesus is asked, as it was common to ask rabbis, to intervene in a property dispute, a bit like what a judge or a mediator might do today. From the text we can assume it was about an estate held by 2 brothers. Their father had died. The inheritance in Jewish law could not be divided unless the older brother agreed. The petitioner, therefore, must be the younger brother, who is demanding that Jesus press his older brother into making a division. The younger brother cries out for justice. And Jesus doesn't oblige. That is, Jesus wants to widen the discussion. What is justice? What is the purpose of material possessions? And where does God feature in all this? 2 brothers, a father and a farm, of course, brings to mind the parable we know of as the prodigal son. In that story, the younger asks for the division of the property before the father has died, receives the inheritance, then squanders it. In doing so, he insults the father, threatens the financial viability of the farm and its dependents, and falls out with his brother. The moral of the prodigal parable, different from today's, is that despite all these destructive actions, reconciliation is still possible. Where the 2 stories are similar is firstly around the viability of the farm and the care for its dependents. The dependents being all those who are not of wealthy means like the brothers, but are labourers, servants, hired hands, and children, suppliers and customers. Is the petitioner of Jesus crying for justice in today's text, considering the impact on the whole farm community? Or is the demand for justice, like the prodigal's, just about himself and his needs? And secondly, the stories are similar in that Jesus' end game is reconciliation in the family, between the brothers, not division. Luke calls only being concerned about ourselves and our needs, he calls it greed, which we might think is a bit harsh. Yet greed and self-centeredness are almost synonymous in the Bible. For the tradition teaches that a self is always a part of other selves, a family and community of selves, to whom we have responsibilities, social obligations, and from whom we receive privileges, like opportunities and support. The idea of a self-made man or woman would be laughable in the biblical context. Everything we have and are, our birth, our formation, our circumstances, our abilities, are the work of God mediated through family, community, and grace. Even in the Joseph saga, Joseph, one of the 12 sons of Israel. Remember, his family, his brothers were violent towards him, left him in the desert to die. Even in that story, the storytellers credit his success not to his remarkable talents, though Joseph did have an inflated sense of his own importance, but the storytellers sheet it home to the work and grace of God. The idea of a self-made person, therefore, is an idolatrous myth, for it replaces God with the self. From a critique of motive, Jesus moves on to talk about possessions. In verse 15, the text today has Jesus saying to the younger brother, "Take care. One's life does not consist in the abundance of possessions." A word about abundance. In the New Testament, it always implies community, not quantity. That is, abundance does not mean, or just mean, enough and more for me, but it means a sufficient amount to share, which segues into the parable I'll get to shortly. Another translation of verse 15 reads, "It's not just that life is more than possessions. It's that more possessions cannot really place one in control of life." Possessions are bonded to a deep, often irrational fear. The fear of one day not having enough. Regardless of how much wealth is saved and stored, this gnawing fear presses some people to acquire more and then more. There is never quite enough for them because the insecurity within never dies. So the desire to acquire and acquire more can be seen and experienced as a sickness. Health is in finding our security in something other than what we own. Health is in not letting possessions and the desire for more control you. So to conclude this first reflection, the younger and aggrieved brother's demand for justice is understood by Jesus to be a symptom of a sickness. Jesus is concerned for needs, not simply earnings. He refuses to answer the demand, but rather strives to give insight into the condition, the sickness that gave rise to it. And by offering insight, he hopes the younger brother will, to use a prodigal son analogy, avoid the pig pen of greed. My second reflection is to go on in this Lucan parable. It's often called the parable of the rich fool. In verse 17, it begins with, "And he thought to himself." And likewise in verse 19, it begins, "And I will say to my soul." In the book, Jesus Through Middle Eastern Eyes, Kenneth Bailey comments, "This is very sad. In the Middle East, village people make decisions about important topics after long discussions with their friends. Families, communities, and villages are tightly knit together. Everybody's business is everyone else's business. Even trivial decisions are made after hours of discussion with family and friends. But this man, the rich farmer, appears to have no friends. He lives in isolation from the human family around him, and with an important decision to make, the only person with whom he can have a dialogue with is himself." Maybe it's what Isaiah was meaning when he wrote, chapter 5, verse 8, "Woe to those who join house to house, who add field to field, acquiring wealth, until there is no more room, and you are made to dwell alone in the midst of the land." The poverty of being apart from, rather than a part of, the community. Wealth, particularly when it ascends the podium of being the paramount driver in one's life, can bring with it a loneliness and even in time a despair. In verse 17, in response to the abundance, the farmer says, speaking to himself, "What shall I do, for I have no place to store my crops?" The possessive pronoun my is the problem. Ambrose, the 4th century Latin theologian, observed, "The things we cannot take with us are not ours. Compassion alone follows us." And Ambrose's pupil, Augustine, said of the rich farmer, "He did not realize the bellies of the poor were much safer storerooms than his barns." Remember in the Lord's Prayer the phrase, "Give us this day our, not my, daily bread"? The Dutch theologian Albert van der Huel once said, "To pray, 'Give us this day our daily bread,' and forget to share it when the prayer is answered, is blasphemy." There is also in our Lucan text no mention of the rich farmer's employees, who have done and will do the work. He shows no concern for them. It's as if they don't exist. Rather, he only knows my crop, my barn, my grain, my goods, and my soul. "Self," he continues, "you have ample goods laid up for years. Take your ease." Quoting Ecclesiastes without a footnote. "Eat, drink, and be merry." Assuming this is as good as it gets. Yet, unlike Ecclesiastes, he has little awareness that his life, let alone his possessions and abundance, are from God. Although many of us at St. Luke's might not imagine that God is a supreme, omnipotent being who hands out life and wealth, the spirituality that nurtures me imagines us in God, completely immersed in life-giving, loving kindness, if only we can see it. And to which the most appropriate responses are the practice and discipline of thankfulness and the building of a common good in which all can receive what they need. So yes, I can affirm that God is the giver of blessings, like life, daily bread, and wealth. The wealthy farmer, also known as the rich fool, failed in his reasoning to account for his mortality. All of us one day, one way or another, will die, and our choices around such timing are limited. We can cooperate with healthy living, and sometimes can lengthen our longevity. Yet sometimes death comes sooner anyway. It just is. Loss is an inevitable part of life. Our choice is not in determining how much time we have left, but what to do with the time we've been given. The Judeo-Christian tradition states boldly that human life is on loan from God. It is a gift, not a right. The rich farmer assumed that he owned his soul, his self, and then discovered his mistake. He had misunderstood the nature of his own soul or self or life. He thought it could be fully nourished and sustained by material possessions. He assumed those possessions had greater power than God. Hence the word fool. Returning to the beginning of our text with the younger brother petitioning for justice, Jesus indirectly says, "Supposing you win your fight with your brother over the inheritance, what then? look beyond your earthly life. To whom will your inheritance one day belong? Whether the inheritance is divided or not, both you and your brother need to recognize that it ultimately belongs to God. You are both responsible as stewards before God for your material possessions and for how you spend the days of your lives. Your wealth and your lives are on loan, and both of you can destroy yourselves if you do not curb an insatiable desire for more. Instead, in a spirit of thankfulness to God, you can use your wealth and your lives to build a common good for all in the community, enriching the whole, helping the weak, encouraging the strong, providing for the future. So in conclusion, the parable of the rich fool is an object lesson in the dangers of wealth, reminding us that these dangers have social as well as spiritual form. Wealth, like poverty, is not just a matter of economics or politics. Wealth can create distorted versions of people and of whole groups and even nations, who then fail to realize their dependence on God and duty to neighbor, are not merely closely related, that dependence on God and duty to neighbor, but completely inseparable. For without a sense of those for whom and with whom we live not only in separation from them, but also from God.